Paul Fletcher, thanks for joining us. The first thing to say about the tech giants, Facebook, Google and the like, I suppose, is whether or not you think they pay enough tax in Australia, and if not, what can you do about that?
Well, the ACCC Digital Platforms Review, which released its final report on Friday, the Treasurer and I released that report, goes to a wide range of issues. At core, it goes to competition issues. I'll leave it to the Treasurer to comment on tax matters, but the ACCC review looks at the substantial market power that Google and Facebook have in Australia. 71 cents of every dollar of advertising spend, excluding classifieds, goes to these two platforms. And the number of Australians who engage with them every month is just staggering. 19.2 million use Google every month, 17.3 million YouTube, which is owned by Google. I'm sorry, 17.6 million. 17.3 million use Facebook and 11.2 million use Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. These are enormous numbers, and what the ACCC report goes into in over 600 pages of detail is the extraordinary pervasiveness that the platforms have in the lives of just about every Australian, and the market power that comes with that. The ACCC finds that both have substantial market power, and that then has a range of public policy implications, including for consumers.
Absolutely. I'll come to the market power issues in a moment, but when you talk about the vastness of these digital platforms, the amount of revenue they're reaping, they get all the benefits of being publishers, especially the revenue, but they don't bear any of the responsibilities. Shouldn't they be treated as publishers, therefore responsible for everything that is put up online? That seems to make sense, although it would be very impractical for them, wouldn't it, for them to be able to control, have a guiding hand, some sort of responsibility for everything that is posted on them?
Well, the digital platforms say that their role is not the same as a traditional publisher. They don't, for example, vet material or engage in curatorial or editorial functions before material is posted on their site. The way the ACCC looked at this, again, was through a competition lens. It made the point that the digital platforms compete for the eyeballs and the attention of Australian consumers, and indeed consumers around the world, and compete against traditional media businesses like News Corp, like Seven West Media, like Nine, both its television and its newspaper assets. And the report makes the point that there's a set of regulatory obligations that traditional media businesses face, which the digital platforms do not face. For example, there are Australian content obligations faced by free-to-air broadcasters and pay television operators in Australia. They need to either pay for the production of content in-house or pay to acquire it from independent producers, whereas businesses like Netflix or YouTube don't face those obligations. And so that's one of many ways in which there's a lack of competitive neutrality between businesses that are fundamentally competing for the attention of Australian consumers, and in turn to seek to monetise that attention for the purpose of generating advertising revenue. So the ACCC very much comes at this from a competition perspective, although it also, in the report, has a range of recommendations in relation to traditional journalism and the civic function, you might call it, of quality journalism. It has recommendations in relation to matters like...
The real point, though, is that when it comes to Facebook and Google, that they don't produce content. They just circulate other people's content. Now, Pre-digital, we had that happy circumstance where the media organisations that soaked up the advertising revenue used that revenue to produce content. That's being undermined, of course, by the digital giants soaking up all of this revenue. Isn't the answer here to somehow find a way to ensure that they pay some sort of fee, some sort of pay-per-view fee to all the subscription media they circulate, obviously, which adds to their eyeballs?
Well, one of the recommendations in the ACCC's report is that there should be a code which digital platforms are required to enter into, that's approved by a regulator, that sets out the terms on which they would negotiate with Australian media businesses to carry the content generated by those businesses. So, for example, if you do a search on Google, it'll bring up so-called snippets, pieces, extracts from newspaper articles. Now, news organisations have hired journalists, they've spent money to gather that news, to put it into a story, and that is then getting accessed by people through Google. Similarly, there are issues in relation to photographs which come up, which have been taken by photographers employed by media businesses. And the way that the ACCC expresses it is that Google and Facebook are effectively unavoidable business partners for Australian media businesses. And indeed, a high percentage of traffic to the websites of Australian media businesses, 7 West Media, 9, 10, ABC and SBS, a high percentage of traffic coming to those websites comes via Google or Facebook. And when Google or Facebook change their algorithms, that can produce significant changes, significant reductions sometimes in the amount of traffic coming to the websites of Australian media businesses. So there's a range of issues the ACCC has identified. The particular policy tool they've proposed to respond to that is this notion of a code being developed by the platforms and approved by a regulator in Australia. Now, what we've said is we're going to go out for a period of public consultation, 12 weeks, before we arrive at a final response to the 23 recommendations and announce that by the end of the year. And certainly one of the things we'll be interested in is what are the views of both the digital platforms and Australian media businesses about the workability of that particular policy tool, a code to be developed governing effectively commercial negotiations between Australian media businesses and the digital platforms. Do Australian consumers understand how their data is being used? But it also raises the question, how much damage is being done to competition in the advertising services market and in the media market, and what are the right regulatory tools to address that damage? Now,
exactly. Now, that's very complicated and there's a lot of consultation to go, but the starting point must be that you need to intervene here, right? There must be more regulation to control or at least manage these digital behemoths.
Well, if I go back to what Josh Frydenberg and I said on Friday when we issued the report or released the report, we said on behalf of the Morrison government that we accept the ACCC's overriding theme that there is a need for reform. The government accepts that there is a need for a harmonised media regulatory framework. Of course, the ACCC itself has pointed out that that's going to be a big job and it'll need to be done in stages. But what we've essentially laid out is a path forward. So,
all right, we'll have to wait till the end of the year, Paul Fletcher, to find out. I wonder whether I can just, we are out of time, but I wonder if I can just get an undertaking from you to join me next month to talk about issues relating to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation.
Always happy to talk about issues in my portfolio, and there are many which are of considerable interest.